My Freightliner's dashboard showed an axle reading that didn't match what I felt at the wheel. The truck felt light on the curves, but the system insisted on a high weight on the rear, as if the trailer were carrying something that only existed for the sensors. The sensation on the asphalt was of an empty trailer, but the number on the display put me, on paper, one step away from attracting attention in any automated inspection. The shipment came through a small app, one of those that disappear from your phone when the delivery is complete. Origin, an unmarked yard near Sparks, Nevada. Destination, a cross dock outside Elko. No delivery window, just arrive and leave. The price was too high for a 2-hour drive. The contract included an unusual clause: do not disconnect telemetry during transit. The person writing this isn't thinking about cargo, they're thinking about tracking. At the gate, no one asked for identification. A badge hanging around his neck pointed to the already attached trailer, a standard metal seal, and a secondary plastic seal with a QR code. The manifest stated, wooden supports and returnable pallets, low gross weight, 0 risk category. Before engaging the trailer, I shone a flashlight around the assembly. The trailer floor had recent screw marks and still wet paint in 2 spots near the front axle of the tandem. The smell wasn't of wood, it was of solvent and cold metal. In the cab, the ELD synchronized itself. An unnamed pop-up confirmed updated configuration. The truck recognized the trailer and downloaded a telemetry package I'd never seen before, something related to axle load and compliance priority. The package installed in seconds without a password or confirmation. After that, some menu options were grayed out, as if I had become a guest user of my own equipment. The first mile already brought discomfort. The steering felt too loose for a theoretically empty trailer. Even so, the load display indicated almost the legal limit. That wasn't just strange, it was dangerous, because the balance contradicts what the system registers, not what the body perceives. As I exited Sparks, a gray sedan pulled up behind me and stayed there. It didn't overtake, it didn't move, it didn't change its distance. With each lane change, it adjusted its position as if it were aligned with my differential, waiting for me to make a specific move. The sedan's shadow left me no room for spontaneous decisions. I chose my lane like someone choosing words in a testimonial. At 15 minutes, the panel indicated tire pressure calibration on the trailer. I didn't have tire pressure sensors on that trailer. Still, the reading appeared, and along with it, the axle load changed as if someone had turned an invisible knob under the asphalt. I pulled over to a wide shoulder and slowly circled the vehicle around. The air valves were normal, the tires seemed inflated. No leaks. The sedan also stopped some distance away. Hood pointed towards me, no doors opening, no headlights turning on, just its presence. The wind was blowing from the side, and the vehicle responded as if there were no inertia. Even so, the system registered me as heavy. It was the first contradiction a researcher would never see because it doesn't appear in reports. What immediately caught my eye were 2 new covers on the connection boxes near the ABS harness. The torque screws were gleaming and the plastic was far too clean for a pallet trailer. It looked like a quick swap done by someone who didn't want to leave any marks. Besides the new caps, I noticed the tire valve caps had a tiny mark, an almost invisible red dot. Caps like that are used to identify batches, but there they looked like antennas. The idea that they were reading and transmitting something directly from the tires made me understand why the dashboard was inventing calibrations. Someone was injecting load data from what the network believed to be a pressure sensor. I turned back and continued on. It felt like driving a well-constructed lie. With every bump in the road, the truck responded as if it were empty, but the system registered a high load, and the app insisted on constant speed, as if that were part of the contract and not a request. Near Wadsworth, a weighbridge sign appeared and the bypass transponder on the windshield lit up green. I hadn't even requested a bypass. The green light came on too quickly, as if the outcome had already been decided before I arrived. And that doesn't happen by chance. The green light gave me a bad feeling. Someone had already adjusted my risk for that weighbridge before I even existed. And if they adjusted it once, they can adjust it as many times as necessary. In the ELD event panel, a line appeared and disappeared in seconds. Axle profile updated. I tried to pull up the history and the screen returned managed configuration. I was following the track, but someone, somewhere, had their hand on my axle profile. The mechanics of the crime became clear without me even opening the trailer. They weren't hiding cargo from customs officials. They were manipulating what the system believed to be cargo. If the risk algorithm sees a normal truck, it doesn't call for inspection, and a modern weighbridge follows the algorithm. The scam was to use these signals to feed compliance platforms for trucking companies and insurers, creating a perfect history that authorized routes and cargo values that, in the real world, would trigger a human audit. I'd heard stories of people tampering with the steering wheel, but this was more sophisticated. The trailer carried an electronic heart that could lie about weight, pressure, distribution, and even the exact moment I could have stopped. I was an easy link to replace, and that's precisely why I needed to act as if I didn't notice. A driver who notices becomes a variable. A variable becomes a problem. On the screen, the trailer alternated between numbers as if breathing. I saw the change happen in specific sections, before traffic control signs, before yard entrances, before cameras. It wasn't random, it was geofencing. The gray sedan disappeared without overtaking. A dark SUV appeared ahead and maintained the same distance from my tailgate for too long, as if pulling me by a thread. My phone rang from a blocked number. I didn't answer, and the app recorded an unauthorized stop registered while I continued moving. The message in the app didn't need to be true. It needed to be registered. If someone audited tomorrow, it would appear that I disobeyed a procedure, which makes any complaint of mine a story of an undisciplined driver. My head grew hot and my body grew cold. If I reacted wrongly, I would become a risk. If I reacted right, I would become a tool. I needed to finish the section without giving away curiosity and without giving away fear, because both are costly. I pulled into an old gas station before Fernley and parked outside the main cameras. I turned off the engine. The axle load display dropped halfway, and yet the telemetry continued transmitting. A trailer communicating with the system with the truck dead only means one thing: self-powered installation back there. I knelt on the gravel and looked underneath. A new metal module was attached to the frame rail, a thin cable going into the ABS harness, and another cable disappearing into the floor. An unmarked sticker bore only a code and a lightning bolt symbol. Factory parts don't come like this. While I was examining the module, it crossed my mind to call the patrol and request an inspection. But I had already seen the green bypass light turn too quickly and knew that the same hand that let me off the hook could bury me with a click. An accusation without physical proof becomes a confession that I knew. If I started it, it would create a failure log. If I left it, I would prove that I'm the kind of driver who doesn't touch anything. I went back to the cab, started the engine, and the weight returned to the credible value. In the corner of the dashboard, a small light blinked once as confirmation. I got back on the road and kept up the pace. The desert seemed open and innocent, but what mattered was in the readings. The whole operation didn't need weapons, it needed false compliance. People who pass through weighbridges like they pass through a green light. The feeling of being led along an invisible rail worsened when the ELD, electronic logistics device, suggested on its own an alternative route citing traffic. The alternative avoided a secondary way station and crossed an isolated industrial area. I ignored the suggestion and the system registered an efficiency deviation. A state patrol car pulled over to the side of the road near Lovelock. I drove past without looking. No flashing lights, no chase. The patrol car didn't even move. I wasn't a suspect. I was approved by a statistical model fed by tampered sensors. The patrol car parked on the side of the road was the kind of presence that usually scares newcomers. But there it served as a warning. There was enforcement, but they didn't see me as a target. It was as if my truck carried a digital trusted stamp issued by someone more powerful than the highway patrol officer. When I arrived at my destination, it wasn't a warehouse. It was a fenced-in yard with closed docks and a small stationary crane. An employee in a reflective vest scanned the QR code on the secondary seal without asking for paperwork. Instantly, the app displayed completed, and the ELD, Electronic Logistics and Disaster Management, registered a new profile update. Upon entering, I noticed cameras pointed at the trailer's license plate, not the dock. They wanted evidence that the equipment had been there at the correct time. The logistics of crime don't need witnesses. They need timestamps. The axle weight dropped to 0 as if I had unloaded. I was still attached. Nothing physically changed, only the record. That's when the logical rupture occurred. I wasn't transporting a thing. I was transporting a signed version of the world, an electronic reality that authorized another movement outside. From that second on, any investigation into the cargo would hit a wall. The system said I had unloaded. Therefore, there was nothing to look for in my vehicle. Whatever existed inside the floor could be removed later, elsewhere, by someone else, without my name on the paperwork. I left the yard with instructions to return the trailer to another point, on a route that passed near a railway branch line and an unnamed warehouse. The smell of solvent and the new screws on the floor finally clicked into place. It wasn't a pallet. It was a thin compartment, made for dense, small items, metal, currency, industrial parts, the kind of cargo that pays the risk and fits the lie. I came to see the scheme as a bridge. Tampered sensors created a clean record. The record allowed bypasses and reduced inspection. The bypass allowed discrete compartments to be moved between points that never appear as the official sender or recipient. The dense metal leaves one place, enters another, and nobody asks why the record is perfect. 2 hours later, I left the trailer at the designated spot. The app had already disappeared from my phone, and ELD was back to normal, as if nothing had happened. The following week, a better offer appeared with the same characteristics. I didn't accept it because I understood that the scheme doesn't need a conscious accomplice. It needs someone to orchestrate a lie until it becomes official documentation. When I opened the day's log, the blocked route was still there, buried. I didn't have the cargo, I didn't have the app, I didn't have the trailer, but I had a trail that I couldn't erase. That's how they trap a driver. Not with handcuffs, but with a history that can be interpreted when it suits them. If you're enjoying these chilling stories, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any more terrifying tales to come. Now, get ready for another journey down dark and mysterious roads. The truck responded before I even touched the brake, as if someone had pulled the rear axle by an invisible thread and then let go, just to see if I would notice. The dashboard showed no fault. The engine maintained a clean RPM. The air pressure remained stable, and yet the trailer swerved slightly, which didn't match the wind or the patched road surface. It didn't feel like skidding. It felt like the mass was shifting, that brief delay that goes through the steering wheel and reaches your stomach. The cargo was sealed in an unmarked yard in southern Illinois, near a dead railroad track and a corridor of seemingly empty silos. No sign on the fence, no reception area, just a dock marked with ink and an employee who checked my chassis number like someone confirming a password. The manifest said agricultural implement parts, average weight, generic destination, but the freight cost was far too high to be just that. The contract arrived outside my normal routine, with prepayment and an obsessive route clause. The route was written with surgical precision. I-55, then I-70, a sequence of exits with tight schedules, short stops, and no convenience checkpoints. It wasn't guidance, it was imposition. And imposition always has a reason. On the first long climb in Missouri, I felt the trailer lighten up, as if it had suddenly lost a few hundred pounds. On the next descent, the drag returned as if someone had shifted the weight back onto the last axle. When I accelerated, the whole thing responded normally. When I cruised for too long, that slight tug would come, alternating, repeated. I pulled up to an old truck stop. Cold lights, a parking lot full of unmarked trailers and trucks with license plates from states too far away to be there by chance. I did a full circle, checked the tires, fifth wheel, locks, hoses, and lights. Seals intact, no cuts, no fresh glue, no replaced tape. Even so, the tarp seemed tighter in certain spots, as if something underneath was pressing from the inside and then relaxing. I returned to the cabin with a dry feeling. I had signed an agreement I didn't understand, and that's worse than signing something illegal. Common drugs and weapons smell like the street. This smelled like an office. Invisible mechanics leave no mark on the document, but they leave a mark on the driver when someone decides to look for someone to blame. In Kansas, the pattern became clear. Flat stretches made everything seem normal, as if nothing was happening. On long climbs, the front end felt too light. and fuel consumption fluctuated by tenths of a second without explanation. On wide curves, a lateral pull appeared, disappearing before turning into instability, as if an internal weight had shifted a few centimeters and then locked into place. Circles, cycles, precision. I started driving with excessive caution, slowing down so as not to give a trooper a reason to pick me up in the middle of traffic. I knew the look of someone hunting strange trucks on I-70. They don't need proof, just a feeling. And when a police officer senses something, they make up the story later. I needed there to be no feeling at all. Near Salina, my prepaid cell phone vibrated without ringing. There was no saved number, no long text, no signature. Just coordinates and a time, as if someone were adjusting my schedule in real time, measuring my average miles per hour and my refueling time. No direct threat, but one certainty. Being late wouldn't be a minor detail, it would be a mistake. The route avoided fixed weighbridges but pushed me into corridors with sensor gantries and traffic cameras. I knew them. They measure height, speed, axle count, and in some states, estimate axle weight by impact and pavement deformation. I passed through these gantries as if I were being read, not just filmed. This wasn't avoiding inspection. It was using inspection as part of the plan. In the early morning, a stretch of bad asphalt caused the truck to shake uncontrollably. That's when I heard a short, precise snap coming from below. It wasn't metal breaking. It was a lock-shifting position, like the click of a ratchet that only works when no one is looking. The sound repeated itself later in another vibration, always with the same interval, always at the end of a sequence of jolts. It seemed impossible to tamper with compartments without breaking the seal, but I knew about false walls, raised floors, and duplicate boxes that pass quick inspection. What I didn't know was the idea of a mobile compartment, internal modules that move by gravity, guided by rails, stops, and timed locks, changing the weight distribution as if they were giant drawers inside the trailer. At that moment, I understood that I wasn't just transporting cargo. I was activating a mechanism with the road itself. Every climb, every curve, every vibration was a command. The truck became a keyboard, the terrain a password, and I was just the hand keeping the rhythm, because stopping in the middle of the process seemed exactly what they didn't want. I tried to break the pattern on the Hayes exit, turning onto a secondary road without a toll gate, just to see what would happen. The truck responded with a sudden shift in its center of mass. The weight shifted all at once and the rear left its lane for a second that felt like a minute. The steering wheel became heavy, the trailer pulled, and then everything returned as if nothing had happened. A wordless warning delivered directly to the body. After that, I drove as if I were carrying something alive. Not out of superstition, but out of logic. The more I improvised, the more aggressive the system became, as if it were trying to correct the route forcefully. It depended on predictability, and predictability depended on me obeying. I started counting the minutes between stops, choosing empty gas stations to refuel quickly, even avoiding the coffee break that made me lose 5 minutes. The manifest pointed to eastern Colorado, and I knew the region. It made no sense to deliver disassembled agricultural implements to a remote warehouse down a gravel road, with no business address, no sign, no gate. Even so, the itinerary pushed me there, and the more I thought about refusing, the more I remembered my clean record, my history, my insurance. My name was what they had bought. Before the border, I stopped at a short rest area, just to check the axles and look underneath with a flashlight. I saw recent marks on the screws of the inner floor support, clean scratches, exposed metal, as if wrenches had passed over them hundreds of times. It wasn't a makeshift road repair. It was a workshop assembly, repeated, calibrated, documented somewhere I would never see. The worst part was imagining an inspection opening the tarp and finding perfectly plausible boxes and pallets with impeccable labels and fastenings. The crime wasn't in what was visible. It was in what wasn't immediately apparent. A second floor that repositions itself, a set of modules that changes its center of mass, a compartment that only aligns at certain angles. The kind of thing a curious officer would call a structural change, and a developer would call intention. This created two versions of the same load. For external reading, I presented different signatures along the route, varying the axle load distribution in a controlled manner. It wasn't to deceive a stationary scale. It was to confuse any subsequent reconstruction, because even with gantry crane records, no one could determine the fixed, real weight of the trailer. The truck became a mobile alibi. In the middle of Colorado, the crosswind worsened and the invisible wire returned. The weight transfer was small, precise, almost elegant, and the truck seemed to settle as if a piece had clicked into place. I found myself thinking that the system was reaching its final configuration, and that scared me more than previous cycles because finals usually leave a trail. The delivery point was near abandoned silos and a low, dimly lit warehouse. Enough for cameras to see through, but not enough to attract attention from a distance. I entered without being greeted. The gate was unlocked, the loading dock empty. There were recent forklift tracks, tire tracks in the gravel. The place had the strange cleanliness of someone operating without witnesses. I parked the trailer where the manifest indicated and left. Minutes later, an automated email confirmed the delivery, as if the registration were done by geolocation and time, not by signature. The silence of the place was part of the procedure. There was no one to argue with, because there was nothing to argue about. I just needed to leave. When I coupled it back up, the truck felt lighter in a way that didn't match just unloading pallets. The weight had shifted even before I pulled. This meant that the important part wasn't what they unloaded. It was what had already been transferred inside during the route. The final delivery was a facade. The real work had happened in motion. Understanding came like a drop in pressure. The mobile cargo wasn't just for hiding, it was for distribution. At specific points along the road, vibration and tilt released small units through a discrete duct in the floor, depositing packages in planned locations without stopping, without an open door, without a gas station camera. The trailer was a contraband spreading machine, and the road was the map. The next day, on a local radio news program, they talked about a federal investigation into dynamic compartmentalization linked to technological smuggling and repeated routes. They cited counties, dates, and a pattern of trucks that never showed up with the same weight signature. I knew that pattern because it had passed through my hands. My sequence of interstates was there, clearly laid out, like a signature I myself had left on the asphalt. I switched trucks after that, at least on paper. I started driving for other people's fleets, avoiding easy money, avoiding contracts with perfect routes, avoiding nameless yards. Even so, on long downhill stretches my body waits for the sudden relief that doesn't come, as if the memory remained on the steering wheel. What keeps me awake isn't moral. It's the technical certainty that it worked, and that one day someone might retrace the route with the right data and find my name. I kept receipts, routes, and fuel records as if paper could protect me, but paper only shows where I've been, not what fell from my floor. If a notification pops up, it will be too late to explain that I only followed the road. The road was also following a plan. There wasn't an exact point where I decided to cross the line. What happened was that there was too short an interval between two normal decisions, made with the naturalness of someone who has traveled thousands of miles without ever having to explain themselves to anyone. I accepted a freight job that didn't seem different from dozens I'd done over the years and, minutes later, confirmed a schedule adjustment that wasn't in the original contract. Neither of these things was illegal when analyzed in isolation. The mistake was the combination and, mainly, the speed with which they came together. The shipment appeared in the system as generic industrial material. Sealed boxes, average weight, clean documentation, regular origin. Nothing that would arouse the curiosity of inspectors or generate an automatic alert. The destination was an active warehouse in West Texas, one of those that operate in continuous cycles, with forklifts running through the night and trucks coming and going without a real break. The delivery window was too short for the distance, but that wasn't uncommon when someone was willing to pay for urgency. I was coming from New Mexico, leaving late in the afternoon. The sky was darkening quickly, and the road entered that strange state where everything seems suspended between shifts. It wasn't day anymore, but it wasn't really night yet. I maintained a constant speed, within the limit, trying to conserve fuel and my sanity. The dashboard clock showed everything as expected, at least until the phone vibrated. The message came from a number I hadn't saved. A dry, direct text, no greeting, no signature. Just a new suggested delivery time, moving it up by almost an hour, accompanied by a promise of an automatic bonus if I confirmed within 5 minutes. There was no justification, no explanation, just the offer and the implicit countdown. It wasn't the first time someone had requested an adjustment outside the standard workflow. Supply chains thrive on small advances and delays that compensate for each other later. The risk is usually financial, not criminal. I accepted. The app confirmed the new time, but it took longer than usual to synchronize. The icon spun for too long before stabilizing, as if it were negotiating something beyond a simple change. A few kilometers later, I heard the siren. It didn't sound close or urgent. It was a constant, steady sound, always at the same distance, as if I were attached to the truck by an invisible thread. I looked in my rear-view mirrors. There was no police car, no direct light, just the blue reflection scattered on the asphalt. I maintained my speed. In any real situation, this would have been a serious mistake. But this didn't feel like a chase. The siren stopped just as suddenly as it had started, without any transition. That's when I noticed the first truly unusual detail. The radio was on, volume up, but there was no noise whatsoever. No distant music, no interference, no static. A silence too clean for an open highway. The dashboard seemed normal except for the clock, which began to lose momentum almost imperceptibly, 1 second every minute. I kept driving, trying to ignore the growing feeling of displacement. The world around me seemed right, but time no longer fit the expected sequence. Signs appeared too early. Exits came sooner than I remembered. The road was the same, but the rhythm was wrong. The designated stopping point appeared sooner than expected. An old, officially deactivated weighbridge outside the regular inspection circuit. There was no gas station, no bathroom, and no adequate lighting. Just cracked concrete, faded signs, and an empty guardhouse. The app indicated that this stop was a mandatory technical stop. Not for rest. For synchronization. I pulled the truck over and turned off the engine. The silence grew denser, heavier, as if it had occupied physical space. I got out of the cab and felt the air was too still for that open stretch of road. A man emerged from the shadow of the guardhouse as if he had been there for hours. He was wearing a reflective vest without any identification, too clean for someone who works in that kind of forgotten place. He didn't ask for documents, didn't ask my name, didn't check the license plate or the seal. He pointed directly to the panel, as if that explained everything. He said I was too early. Not for the warehouse, but for the sequence. He said that shipment needed to arrive exactly when another one was delayed, so that a third could go through the system without generating a conflict in the records. He didn't mention illegal products, didn't talk about smuggling or values. He spoke of alignment, of closing gaps that couldn't be allowed to appear. While he was explaining, I noticed that the dashboard clock had stopped completely. It wasn't running slow anymore. It was motionless. The engine being off made sense. The clock didn't. He asked me to wait. He didn't touch the truck, didn't open any compartments, didn't handle any paperwork. He simply watched the time stand still, like someone checking an invisible process. I stood there not knowing if minutes or seconds were ticking by. When he gave me permission to continue, the clock started working again, but it showed 40 minutes less than before the stop. There was no mechanical logic to it. I left there with the clear feeling that something had been altered without physical contact, without recording, and without any possibility of proof. The first active gas station appeared just ahead, full, brightly lit, noisy, and too lively after that silence. I went in to register my stop and check the time. The attendant typed in my license plate, frowned, and looked at me as if I had arrived too late. He said the system showed my truck as having been stopped in that area for over an hour. To him I was late, to my dashboard I was early. It became clear then that the problem wasn't my watch, it was the system's time. I was running outside the official registration grid. The boxes were just a pretext. What really mattered was my presence in that dead interval, where schedules don't match and events don't overlap correctly. I left the gas station without refueling. I didn't want to leave a physical trace in a place where technically I shouldn't exist. I returned to the road with the feeling of carrying something that wasn't visible in the trailer. The asphalt changed texture. It felt slightly wet, reflecting lights I couldn't pinpoint. A dark SUV appeared on the left, maintaining a steady distance, neither attempting to overtake nor pulling away. It was driving at exactly the same pace as me, as if stuck in the same rut. There were no flashing lights, no siren, just presence. The radio started crackling again, and an unidentified voice came on asking for confirmation of arrival before the agreed time. I didn't respond. The SUV's presence made it clear that I was still being watched, even without direct contact. The risk was no longer about being stopped. It became about arriving too early at the destination. If I broke the alignment, the whole sequence would collapse, and my name would be the one appearing in the reports. I reduced my speed to the minimum acceptable level without drawing attention. Each kilometer seemed to stretch beyond normal. When the warehouse finally appeared, the gates opened without any inspection. No documents were requested. No seals were checked. The boxes were unloaded quickly, silently, as part of a rehearsed routine. No one commented on the contents, weight, or origin. They simply disappeared into the internal flow. I waited for instructions inside the cab, listening to the trailer vibrate with the movement inside. It felt like the truck no longer weighed quite the same, although nothing indicated any obvious physical change. It wasn't about what went in or out. It was about what went unnoticed. There was no signature. The person in charge simply said I needed to leave before the system remembered me. I asked about the promised bonus. He laughed awkwardly, as if money were a minor detail in that transaction. On the way back, everything seemed too normal. The dashboard clock showed the correct time. The radio worked. The SUV was no longer there. The gas station was listed as visited on the app. No apparent irregularities. Still, I drove with the feeling that I had left something behind. Not on the shoulder of the road, but at some invisible point along the route. I drove for almost 2 hours without stopping, trying to mentally reconstruct every decision of the night. I thought about the time adjustment, the deactivated scale, the man in the vest, the stopped clock. Nothing seemed enough to justify the kind of flaw I was beginning to see in the system. It was as if my route had been used as a template for something else I would never see. Hours later, the notification arrived. Delivery canceled due to timing inconsistency. Payment blocked for review. No direct accusation, no detailed explanation. Just the indication that my license plate was now associated with an unusual event. There was no contact phone number, no defined deadline. Just the cold warning that someone, somewhere, had noticed the problem. I tried to continue working as usual. I took short loads, simple routes, and worked with familiar clients. Even so, strange errors kept appearing. Duplicate schedules, stops recorded before I arrived, sections where I appeared stopped without ever having turned off the engine. In some reports, my truck appeared 2 minutes ahead of its actual time. At first, I treated it as a technical glitch. I updated the app, restarted the tracker, changed the SIM card. Nothing changed. The inconsistencies didn't disappear. They just shifted, appearing at different points along the route, always at small intervals that no one could quite explain. That's when freight rates started to change. Normal offers became scarce. Instead, urgent proposals appeared with excessively tight windows, poorly detailed origins, and destinations that required arrival at specific, almost surgical times. There was always a bonus involved. There was always a senseless urgency. I refused the first offers. Within a few hours, I received notifications of limitations due to operational risk. My profile had been reclassified. It wasn't blocked, but it was no longer reliable for the common market either. I had become a specific asset. The penny dropped when a former customs broker who had known me for years called to ask why I was accepting these strange windows. He said that, to the system, I appeared as someone who could absorb delays without creating conflict. A springboard, a buffer against failures. It became clear then that I hadn't just been involved in a one-off event. I had been incorporated into a larger mechanism. My history now served to justify other potholes, other overlaps, other loads that needed to pass where they shouldn't. The driving force was never the boxes. It was the gap. I had been used to fill a void that couldn't exist in official reports, a space between records where illegal decisions hide without needing weapons, threats, or visible exchanges. The result wasn't prison or easy money. It was something more permanent. Since that night, any freight I accept shows up early or late in the system, always outside the ideal hours. This keeps me working, because there's demand for those who know how to operate outside the official schedule. But it also ties me to a type of cargo that doesn't officially exist. There was no classic chase, no violence, no handcuffs. Just the silent realization that certain crimes don't happen in physical space. They happen in time. And once you learn to drive between schedules, you can never again arrive exactly when you should.